From senseless crimes to gruesome murders, so many cases have baffled police and captivated the public for decades. Let's delve into the dark and puzzling world of 7 of the most mysterious unsolved murders of all time. The Paraquat Murders. The Paraquat Murders were a series of indiscriminate poisonings that occurred in Japan in 1985. The victims were killed by the Japanese soft drink, or agonizingly, which had somehow been spiked with herbicide paraquat. The first recorded victim was 52-year-old Otsu, who stopped at a vending machine on his way to go fishing and purchased 2 bottles of agonizingly. Shortly after drinking this, Hirao was taken to hospital in Tondobayashi, where he died the next night. 35 poisonings followed, with 11 being fatal and causing death between April the 30th and November 17th. The infected drink was usually left in the slot of the machine so as to trick people into thinking they got lucky and received a drink for free. While the police were completely dumbfounded, they did strongly believe that the crimes were only executed by one single person. They also expressed that the crime seemingly had no target or consistent victims, making it incredibly hard to establish a motive. The heartless murderer was never caught and could indeed still be walking free in Tokyo to this day. There were also a small amount of reports in the months after the murders of people who were trying to imitate the heinous crimes, both trying to poison people, but also in isolated and tragic cases, trying to poison themselves. Tracey Neilson. Tracey Neilson lived in Moore, Oklahoma, and on January the 5th, 1981, was about to celebrate her 21st birthday. Her husband was rushing home to spend it with her, but what he found was truly horrifying. He discovered Tracey's lifeless body in their empty apartment. Her throat was slit and she had been stabbed many times in the chest, and there was no trace of who was responsible. During the police investigation, Tracey's husband Jeffrey was able to be ruled out right away as a suspect, as he had been at college. That afternoon, her friends and family had been trying to call her to wish her a happy birthday, but obviously no one answered the phone. Tracey had not been sexually assaulted, there was no evidence of a break-in, and also no signs of a struggle inside the apartment. Robbery didn't appear to be a motive either, as there was only one item missing from the apartment, which was a keychain with Tracey's name on, which police believe the culprit took as a souvenir of his horrendous crime. The murderer did leave a single fingerprint in the apartment, which police have analysed, but sadly to this day no match has ever been found. Left behind at the apartment was a cable ticket book, with some sources claiming it was from Southern Western Bell for cable repair, although the company has never been officially confirmed. However, it does appear the culprit was impersonating, or actually was, a repairman. Whoever filled out the book noted that the work was completed and then disturbingly signed it off. The police of course were desperate to find someone who recognised the signature or the handwriting. However, since the grisly murder, 1,500 leads have been followed up on, but after 40 long years, the police are no closer to discovering the truth of who brutally killed Tracey Neilson on her 21st birthday. Elaine Nix. Elaine Nix was only 18 years old back in 1999, but on September 20th she met a tragic end at the hands of someone who still has never been identified. Elaine lived in Gainesville, Georgia, and many evenings would call her boyfriend from a payphone on Candler Road because at the time she wanted to save money and it was cheaper for her to call from there. That night, Nix talked to her partner for over an hour, with the call ending around 1 AM. A police officer later discovered Elaine's car in the convenience store parking lot at 2 AM, with the key still in the ignition, and her purse and cigarettes in the back seat. The engine was still warm, so it seems this officer only just missed what happened to the youngster. Of course, Elaine was reported as missing by her parents, and then for the 8 days following, those closest to her scouted the area to try and find her, searching the nearby woods. Unfortunately, their search was fruitless, and on September 29th, a man cutting grass behind Buford Industrial Park began to smell something strong. Following the scent, the man made a terrible discovery: the dead body of Elaine Nix. When an autopsy was carried out, it was determined she had not been shot, stabbed or beaten, and it is believed she was either strangled or smothered to death. Police speculated whether Elaine had been murdered by a trucker, as the location of the payphone was a very popular spot for truckers to pull up and stop off on their journey. However, the possibility has also been suggested that the young lady could have witnessed a drug deal while on the payphone, and that she was killed to silence her. In the years that passed, the leads dried up and the case went cold, and sadly, Elaine Nix's tragic murder remains unsolved to this day. Her family still hold out hope that in the future, the murderer will be brought to justice. Betsy Aardsma. The murder of Betsy Aardsma back in 1969 baffled police and still remains unsolved. On November 28th, Betsy was found dead from a single stab wound inside the Petit Library at the Pennsylvania State University. Despite her case remaining officially unsolved, several independent journalists and authors have stated that they believe the murderer to have been Penn State geology professor Richard Hafner. However, this man was never charged, and he died in 2002. A witness named Richard Allen was the last person reported to see Aardsma before her death, when he overheard a conversation between her and a male around the area surrounding the photocopier. Although he could not hear what the two were talking about, he said nothing gave him cause for concern. Seconds later, he heard the sound of Betsy fall into something nearby, and then a young man who he described as looking like a student barged past him. Two students also saw a man run out of the commotion, yelling that the girl needs help. Witness Elaine Nix recalled the man was about 6 feet in height, had brown hair, and may have been wearing glasses. This unknown individual led Erdley and her friend to the body, and then as quick as he had appeared, ran out of the library. The unknown person was asked to come forward by the police as they were not sure if this was the murderer or just a panicked student. However, he never came forward and has never been identified. Richard Hafner gave police and friends of Betsy cause for concern, as he had apparently visited her several times in the weeks prior to her death, and was known for periodic bouts of explosive anger, and his description closely matched the person seen in the library. And it is even more of a concern that in the weeks prior to her death, Aardsma had ended her friendship with Hafner due to the fact he had made her feel very uncomfortable. Hafner went on to have several more disturbing events reported about him in the years after. However, there was simply no hard evidence or anything concrete that could link him to Aardsma's murder. There were a few other suspects such as student Larry Mora and an acquaintance named William Spencer, but again, police were unable to pin anything on anyone. The unsolved murder of Betsy Aardsma to this day is one of the most bizarre and haunting ever to take place in Pennsylvania. This innocent young woman and her sad fate is far from forgotten, and it is such a shame that justice was never served. The Grimes sisters. On December 28, 1956, 15-year-old Barbara and her 13-year-old sister Patricia left their home in Chicago at 7:30 p.m. and made their way to Brighton Theatre to watch the Elvis Presley movie Love Me Tender. The next day they were reported missing, although the police initially dismissed this until several days later, believing the youngsters had likely just run away from home. Of course, the police were forced to take this serious after a week and began their thorough investigation. The case was known nationwide within weeks, and when Elvis Presley himself heard about the case, the rock and roll icon made a statement asking the girls to return home. Tragically, on January 22, 1957, a gentleman named Leonard Prescott came across the girls' nude bodies near Willow Springs. The two teenagers had both died of shock and the cold temperature. Police investigated several suspects, including Edward Bedwell, who was actually seen with the girls after they were missing. Bedwell was intensively interviewed by police in a motel room for almost 3 days, at the end of which he confessed to the murders. However, he was released after the autopsy reports contradicted his confession. The man was notably mentally challenged, and he told authorities he and the girls went many places for several weeks, but the autopsy reports showed they had died within hours of their disappearance, so Bedwell's claims were eventually dismissed. Years later, a new possible suspect was determined to be Charles Leroy Melquist. Melquist had murdered a girl named Bonnie Leigh Scott in November 1958. She was found in an area less than half a mile from where the Grimes sisters were discovered. Also, Bonnie Leigh was found nude, just as the sisters were. New information surfaced about a phone call that the girl's mother, Lorette Grimes, received a few months after their deaths. The caller told her that he was the one that had killed them, and that one had crossed toes. Barbara did in fact have crossed toes. Mrs. Grimes claimed that the caller then sickeningly laughed and hung up. 2 years later, when Bonnie's body was found, The mother again claimed that she received a phone call from the same man who said that he had gotten away with the girls' murders and that he would get away with Bonnie's murder as well. Mellquist was later arrested and confessed to Bonnie's murder. He was convicted and sentenced to 99 years in prison. He has since died. However, retired West Chicago police officer Ray Johnson, who took an interest in the case in 2013, believes that Mellquist had accomplices that are still alive. Despite this, Mellquist was never officially linked to the murder of the Grimes sisters, and unfortunately this case is still, after all these years, unsolved. Alistair Wilson. Alistair Wilson spent Sunday, November 28, 2004, taking a quiet stroll along the Scottish coast in Nairn, Scotland, with his wife Veronica. After returning to his home, he had dinner and put his two young boys to bed. At around 7 PM, a strange anonymous man came to the door, asking to speak to the then 30-year-old banker. Alistair came to the door and then, shockingly, the man shot him twice in the head and once in the body, leaving his wife and children without a husband and father. The murder inquiry was one of the largest ever carried out in Scotland, and to this day, the case remains unsolved. The lack of motive and random nature of it have led to the case being described as Scotland's most mysterious, unsolved crime. December 2016, the police revealed some interesting information about the gun that was used to kill Alistair. It was a 1920s Harnell Schmeister. This gun is rarely found in the UK, and there have only been 13 of them recovered since 2008. Police believe that soldiers may have brought these guns back to the UK following the Second World War. In October 2020, Alistair's son Andrew started an appeal for more information to be released about his father's senseless murder. Since then, in 2023, police have revealed they strongly believe that two people had actually carried out the shooting, one of them likely a local who they were looking at with previous drug offences. He is hoping this lead pays off and whoever is responsible for this terrible crime is brought to justice so that this innocent family can finally have closure. Jill Dando. On April 26, 1999, Britain lost a well-known and popular journalist and Crime Watch host, Jill Dando. She was shockingly gunned down on her doorstep in what would become one of the United Kingdom's most well-known unsolved murders. The case caused nationwide anxiety, and it became the biggest murder inquiry for the Metropolitan Police since the hunt for the infamous Yorkshire Ripper.
I heard the scream.
You heard it?
I did hear a scream.
Did you hear a man's voice or anything like that?
No man's voice at all.
And did you hear a shot or did you...
There was no shots. That's what I would say was a shot. I wouldn't have thought there was a shot, no.
From your assessment, what appeared to have happened to her?
She was obviously attacked, and whether she was attacked with a knife or whether she was attacked with some sort of instrument, but she is obviously very shocked what happened, and
she was conscious, she was talking?
She wasn't conscious when I saw her.
And what did you do, dial 999 straight away?
I personally didn't, but the people I was with, the two ladies who also live in the street, dialed the number and had the ambulance services there within 10 minutes.
Police took thousands of statements and investigated around 2,000 possible suspects, but only one was ever put on trial. Barry George was arrested on May 5, 2000 and charged for Jill Dando's murder on May 29th. On July 2, 2001, George was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. In a stunning case of proven injustice, 2007 saw George acquitted of the crime after a retrial, and he was released, having spent 8 years behind bars. George ended up filing a claim for $1.4 million in compensation for his wrongful imprisonment, a claim which he was denied. To this day, George says his mistaken conviction has ruined his life, and he still lives looking over his shoulder despite being proven innocent.
In any criminal trial, you're innocent until proven guilty, or so they say. But what they're saying effectively is, oh, you're guilty for your innocence. How can that be?
Sadly, no other suspects have been interviewed by police and the case has been reopened. Some have unproven theories around the murder, such as Jill being the victim of a Serbian hitman who targeted the broadcaster in revenge for the West's aiding of Kosovo in its war with Serbia. 3 weeks before her death, Dando fronted a BBC Kosovo appeal, which raised more than 1 million in 24 hours. Many believe the lack of evidence added reliability to the idea that the murder was the work of a professional, as he had tied up any loose ends and got things done quickly. However, the prosecution in 2001 dismissed the theory. Others suggest she was killed by an obsessive fan or by a hitman from the London underworld who had been hired because of her huge profile exposing cases on Crime Watch. Jill Dando's murder rocked the UK to its very core, and its haunting legacy still looms over the country to this day. Here's hoping that one day soon justice will finally be done and her killer will be put where they belong, which is of course behind bars. It is so sad that many of these cases will never be solved, but they continue to inspire our basic human empathy and remind us of the fragility of life. And perhaps one day, hopefully these families and all the people affected will receive closure. But until then, as always, we are left seeking answers.